Welcome to the deep dive. We are jumping into one of the most fundamental and, let's be honest, frustrating questions of modern life.
Which is?
Why are good people, your neighbors, colleagues, maybe even family, so bitterly divided? You look at the political landscape and it just feels like, well, like we're talking past each other.
It really does. It often feels like negotiating with opponents who operate on a completely alien moral system, like a war zone sometimes.
Exactly.
And our sources today suggest that might be because we humans are fundamentally wired to be moralistic, critical, and judgmental, not just moral.
So not just having morals, but being quite judgmental about them.
Right. The older assumption in psychology, maybe the one we all kind of absorb, is that humans are rational judges.
Yeah.
That we use logic, reason to find the moral truth.
But the psychological reality we're going to unpack is, well, it's far messier, isn't it?
It really is.
Our mission today is to walk you through 3 core psychological principles that seriously challenge that rationalist ideal. They show that reason usually acts more like a very skilled lawyer for our gut feelings.
That's a great way to put it. Tag intuitions come first, strategic reasoning second.
Sure.
Okay, so let's start with the big metaphor for how the mind actually works, according to this view. Picture your mind as being divided into 2 parts.
Okay.
There's a rider and there's an elephant.
A rider and an elephant. Okay, I'm picturing it. The rider is...
The rider is your controlled, conscious thought process. It's the part that speaks, calculates, deliberates. It's what you generally think of as you, the voice in your head.
Got it.
And the elephant.
Yeah.
Well, the elephant is the automatic system. It's the intuitive, emotional, visceral part of the brain. It makes snap judgments, gives you those gut feelings.
Ah, the gut feeling, the
Yeah.
elephant.
Exactly. And the key principle here is that, contrary to what we usually assume, the conscious rider is rarely in full control.
Ugh.
Yeah. In fact, the rider's main job, evolutionarily speaking, seems to be to serve the elephant,
Serve it. How so?
to justify its reactions. Reasoning seems to have evolved not necessarily to seek objective truth, but to rationalize the intuitive reactions the elephant already had.
Wow, okay. That is, well, counterintuitive right there.
Yeah.
We assume we weigh the evidence, think things through, then feel something.
Right.
But you're saying the feeling the elephant's move comes first. Where do we see this in action? Like, how do we know?
We see it very clearly in studies looking at something called moral dumbfounding.
Moral dumbfounding.
Yeah. This is when people have an immediate, often very strong moral judgment like, that's wrong. But when you push them to explain why, they just can't. They get stumped.
Can you give an example?
Sure, the classic examples involve these harmless taboo scenarios, like the story of Julie and Mark, adult siblings who decide to have consensual sex one night while on vacation. They use 2 forms of contraception. Nobody else knows. They don't get hurt. Their relationship isn't harmed. They just decide not to do it again.
Yeah.
So technically, no harm done to anyone.
Right. But I can already feel people reacting negatively.
Exactly. Subjects in studies condemn this instantly, strongly. They'll say, it's disgusting, it's just wrong, it's unnatural.
Okay.
But then the experimenter challenges them. Okay, but who was harmed? They used protection. It was consensual. No one found out. And people struggle. They know it feels wrong. The elephant has already decided, but they can't find a good reason. They're dumbfounded.
So the elephant delivers this instant verdict.
Yep.
And the rider, the reasoning part, immediately starts scrambling, like trying to find a justification after the fact.
Precisely. It becomes your inner lawyer, as Jonathan Haidt calls it, or maybe a press secretary.
Yeah.
Its job isn't to find the truth, but to build the best possible case for the elephant's gut feeling.
A post hoc justification, a reason made up after the feeling.
Exactly. It's a process called confirmatory thought.
Yeah.
We don't search for truth. We search for confirmation of what we already believe or feel.
And here's something really interesting from the sources. This isn't just something, less intelligent people do. High intelligence doesn't protect you.
Not only does it not protect you, it can make you better at it.
Better at justifying your biases.
You're a better inner lawyer. Studies show that people with higher IQs are often much better at generating my-side arguments. They're skilled defense attorneys for their own elephants.
So they're not necessarily better at seeing the other side or finding objective truth.
Not necessarily. They're just more articulate and creative in defending their initial position.
That's deeply unsettling, isn't it? It suggests our smartest people could potentially be the most polarized because they're the best at rationalizing why their team, their elephant, is right.
It certainly challenges the Enlightenment ideal of pure reason leading us to truth.
It completely flips it. It puts reason in the service of intuition.
And the neurological evidence actually backs this up. It supports David Hume's old idea that reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions.
How does neuroscience show that?
Well, look at patients who have damage to a specific part of the prefrontal cortex, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPFC.
Okay, the VMPFC. What happens to these patients?
They lose access to the emotional gut feelings that normally guide our choices. They can reason just fine, logically speaking. They score normally on IQ tests. But they become paralyzed by everyday decisions, choosing what to eat, scheduling an appointment. They can list pros and cons endlessly, but because no option feels better, they can't actually choose.
They lack the emotional tag that says, go this way.
Precisely. The intuition, the elephant, the master, has effectively dropped dead. And without the master providing direction based on feeling, the servant reason is lost. It can't run the estate on its own.
So reasoning needs the passions, the gut feelings to function effectively in the real world.
It seems so. We aren't primarily logical beings who occasionally feel. We're intuitive, feeling beings whose logic evolved largely to help us navigate the social world and justify our feelings to others. Hashtag, there's more to morality than harm and fairness.
Okay, so if Principle 1 tells us how the moral mind works, intuition first, reasoning second, then this next principle is about the content. What rules is the elephant actually following? What makes it react?
Right. For a long time, especially in Western psychology, researchers like Piaget and Kohlberg had a pretty narrow view of morality.
How so?
They mostly focused on justice, rights, and preventing harm. They saw moral development as progressing towards this ideal of impartial justice. That was considered the pinnacle, the universal moral truth.
Makes sense. That feels very familiar.
It does, especially if you grew up in the West. But the sources argue this was a major limitation because those researchers were mostly studying, well, weird people.
Weird. Okay, what does that stand for?
It stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
Ah, so a specific slice of humanity, not necessarily representative of everyone.
Exactly. Anthropologists like Richard Schwader went out and studied morality in more traditional non-Western cultures, like in India, and they found something very different.
What did they find?
They found that this intense focus on the individual rights, individual autonomy, is actually quite unusual globally. Most societies are more sociocentric.
Sociocentric, meaning group-centered.
Yes. The needs of the group, the community, the institution, they come first. Individuals are seen as occupants of roles within that larger structure, and their primary duty is to fulfill those roles. In weird societies, we tend to think society exists to serve the individual. In sociocentric societies, it's more like the individual exists to serve, or at least fit within, the society.
And that difference leads to valuing different things morally. Things we might dismiss as just, I don't know, social convention.
Absolutely. Schrader found that morality in these sociocentric cultures, and arguably for many people within weird cultures too, rests on a broader base. He identified three major ethics.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's the one we know well, the ethic of autonomy.
Right, the individual-focused one.
Exactly. It's based on the idea that individuals are autonomous agents with wants, needs, and rights. So the key moral concerns are things like harm, rights, liberty, freedom, justice, fairness. This is the bedrock of modern liberalism, pretty much.
Okay, that's familiar. What are the other two?
Second is the ethic of community. This ethic emphasizes that individuals aren't just autonomous beings, they're members of larger groups, families, teams, nations, companies. They have roles and duties within a social hierarchy.
So morality here is about...
It's about fulfilling your role. Concerns revolve around duty, obligation, respect for authority, loyalty to your group, tradition, interdependence.
Okay, I can see how that would lead to different judgments, like maybe judging someone for not respecting their elders or putting personal ambition before family duty.
Precisely. An act that seems perfectly fine under the ethic of autonomy, like, say, an adult son addressing his father by his first name, could be seen as a serious moral violation under the ethic of community, a sign of deep disrespect.
Okay, and the third one?
The third is the ethic of divinity. This one often feels the most foreign to secularized modern Westerners. It's based on the idea that people aren't just individuals or group members, but that we contain something sacred or divine within us. The body might be viewed as a temple, not just a machine.
So, morality involves purity, sanctity.
Yes. Concerns center on avoiding degradation, pollution, both physical and spiritual. It's about living in a way that respects the divine or sacred nature of life. Things like piety, cleanliness, protecting the soul from contamination.
Ah, okay. This helps explain those harmless taboo reactions we talked about earlier, like the consensual incest example, or
Yeah.
maybe eating human flesh, even if it's, hygienically prepared from someone who died naturally.
Exactly. The ethic of autonomy says, no harm, no foul. But the ethic of divinity screams, that's degrading. That pollutes something sacred. Even if you can't articulate what exactly is being harmed. Your elephant, tuned to divinity, just reacts with disgust.
That visceral yuck factor.
That's often the ethic of divinity at work. It explains why issues around sexuality, food, death rituals, sacred objects, or places can carry such intense moral weight for people, even when no individual rights seem violated.
So the big takeaway here is, if your moral world is built only on autonomy, only on harm and fairness and individual rights,
Then people operating with strong community or divinity ethics are going to seem completely irrational. Maybe tribal, maybe superstitious, maybe just plain weird.
you become morally blind, in a way, to their motivations. You can't understand why they care so much about, say, loyalty or purity.
You're essentially morally dumbfounded by maybe half the world and perhaps a significant portion of your own country. Hashtag morality binds and blinds.
Which leads us perfectly into the third principle. Morality binds and blinds. If people operate with these broader moral matrices, especially the community and divinity ones, why? What function does it serve?
This goes back to human evolution and our nature as social creatures. Haidt uses this great analogy. We are about 90% chimp and 10% bee.
90% chimp, 10% bee. Okay, unpack that.
The 90% chimp part represents our primate heritage. We're largely self-interested, competitive, status-seeking, like our chimpanzee cousins.
Okay, that sounds familiar enough.
But the 10% bee represents something uniquely developed in humans,
Mm-hmm.
a groupish overlay. We have adaptations that allow us, under certain circumstances, to transcend that selfishness and function like bees in a hive working together for the good of the group.
Becoming ultra-social.
Exactly. We can hive off, lose ourselves in collective action. Think of soldiers in battle, ecstatic dancers at a rave, fans at a football game, members of a tight-knit religious community.
What enabled this bee part?
A key development seems to have been shared intentionality. The ability to share mental representations of tasks, goals, norms, beliefs. We are going to hunt that mammoth. We believe this land is sacred. This allowed for unprecedented levels of cooperation.
And created the basis for shared moral systems, the rules of the hive.
Precisely. These shared moral matrices, built on foundations like autonomy, community, and divinity, were essential for creating cohesive, cooperative groups.
And cooperation is good, but there's a competitive angle too, right?
A huge one. Throughout history, groups that could cohere and cooperate effectively consistently outcompeted groups that couldn't. So our tendency towards groupishness, towards forming these moral hives, was likely favored by group-level selection.
Okay, so this brings us to modern politics. How does this apply to the divisions we see today, say, between liberals and conservatives?
This is where moral foundations theory, or MFT, comes in. It builds on Schroeder's work and suggests there are at least 6 fundamental moral foundations, like taste receptors for the moral world.
6 foundations, what are they, briefly?
Care harm, fairness cheating, loyalty betrayal, authority subversion, sanctity degradation, and liberty oppression.
Okay. And different political groups use these foundations differently.
Radically differently in emphasis. We can think of it as 2 broad moral matrices. First, the liberal matrix.
What does that look like?
It tends to rely very heavily on the first 2 foundations. Care harm, huge emphasis on compassion, especially for victims of oppression and suffering, and fairness cheating, which liberals often interpret primarily as equality, equal rights, social justice. The Liberty Foundation, focused on individual freedom from coercion, is also important.
So primarily focused on the individual, fitting that ethic of autonomy.
Very much so. Now compare that to the conservative matrix.
How is it different?
Conservatives certainly value care and fairness too, but they rely on a much broader set of foundations. They give significant weight to the binding foundations. Loyalty betrayal, patriotism, group cohesion, authority subversion, respect for tradition, legitimate hierarchies, and sanctity degradation. Purity, avoiding contaminants, respect and sacredness.
The ethics of community and divinity are much more prominent.
Exactly. And crucially, their interpretation of fairness often differs too.
How so?
While liberals often emphasize equality of outcomes or treatment, conservatives often emphasize fairness as proportionality. People should get what they deserve based on their effort, their contributions, their actions. Karma, essentially.
Ah, okay. That difference alone, equality versus proportionality, could explain a lot of political arguments about things like taxes or welfare.
Absolutely. It's a fundamental difference in calibrating the fairness foundation.
So let's get to the blinding part. How does binding ourselves to one of these matrices, one of these political hives, blind us?
Because once you're embedded in a moral matrix, especially one shared by your political team, it becomes incredibly difficult to understand or even perceive the moral motivations of the other side,
You just see them as wrong or maybe even evil.
or just nonsensical. For example, many liberals, prioritizing autonomy, tend to view the binding foundations with suspicion. Authority can look like oppression. Loyalty can look like tribalism or xenophobia. Sanctity can look like irrational disgust or puritanism.
So if you actively reject those foundations,
Then you literally cannot understand why a conservative might prioritize, say, national loyalty over global humanitarian concerns, or why they might feel that certain traditions or institutions deserve respect simply because they are long-standing authorities. It looks immoral or illogical through the lens of pure autonomy.
and conservatives might look at liberals and see.
They might see an overemphasis on care and equality that seems to undermine personal responsibility, proportionality, or erodes social order, authority, or disrespects sacred values, sanctity.
There's also this idea of moral capital that conservatives often emphasize. What's that about?
Right. Moral capital refers to the resources that hold a community together, things like trust, shared norms, institutions, traditions, a sense of reciprocity and obligation.
The stuff that makes the hive cohesive.
Exactly. The conservative insight or argument is that some liberal policies, particularly those driven intensely by care and equality, might inadvertently erode this moral capital. For instance, if fairness as proportionality is ignored, people might feel the system rewards irresponsibility, undermining trust and cooperation. Or rapid changes might weaken stabilizing traditions and institutions.
So they see the other side as potentially dismantling the very foundations of a functional society, even if their intentions are good.
Yes. And meanwhile, the liberal side sees the conservative side as clinging to outdated, unfair, or oppressive structures that violate individual rights and perpetuate harm.
And we're back to the inner lawyer. Each side uses its reasoning skills not to understand the other, but to prove why their moral matrix is the only correct and coherent one.
Which further hardens the boundaries of the hive and makes genuine communication almost impossible. Morality binds us together into these powerful cooperative groups.
But the flip side is that it blinds us to the possibility that the other group, the other hive, might also be operating on understandable, albeit different, moral principles.
We see malice or stupidity, but the source material suggests we are often just seeing two different, internally coherent moral systems inevitably clashing. Hashtag outro.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into, well, the righteous mind. We started with that fundamental shift. Intuition, the elephant, comes first. And reason, the writer, is more like its servant or lawyer.
Right, justifying those gut feelings after the fact.
Then we broaden the picture of morality itself, moving beyond just harm and fairness, the weird perspective, to include the ethics of community and divinity, loyalty, authority, sanctity. These are powerful moral forces for much of the world.
They're not just optional extras, they're core foundations for many people.
And finally, we saw how these different moral foundations bind us into groups, into political teams or hives. And this binding process, driven by our groupish nature, inevitably blinds us to the moral logic, the coherence of those who rely on a different mix of foundations.
Especially those binding foundations. Loyalty, authority, sanctity, which are major points of contention.
So thinking about you listening to this, maybe feeling caught in this political crossfire, what's the big takeaway? How can this understanding help?
I think if you take one crucial idea away from this, it's to be deeply suspicious of what you might call moral monists.
Moral monists.
Yeah, anyone on the left, right, or anywhere else who insists that there is one true morality for all people, all times, all places. Especially if they claim that one true morality rests on just a single principle, like maximizing welfare, or achieving perfect equality, or following pure reason.
Because human morality is just messier and more diverse than that.
Exactly. Instead of moral monism, the goal should be something more like moral pluralism.
Pluralism, meaning accepting that there's more than one valid way.
It means recognizing that there might be multiple genuine human values, and sometimes they conflict. The number isn't infinite. MFT suggests maybe 6 core foundations, but they are genuinely diverse. Your opponent isn't necessarily evil or irrational. They might be passionately defending a value like loyalty or authority or sanctity that your own moral matrix downplays, but which is still a recognizable part of the human moral repertoire.
So understanding doesn't mean agreeing.
Not at all. but it means acknowledging the reality of different moral matrices. It gives you the intellectual tools to move beyond just condemnation and start asking why they hold the values they do.
And maybe, just maybe, that understanding is the first step toward loosening the grip of that blinding partisan hive mind.
That's the hope. Understanding the game we're all playing.
A fascinating and perhaps slightly uncomfortable look in the mirror for all of us. Thank you for diving deep with us today.